This is an efficiency type of talk. I'm not really going to go into threat hunting too much, but basically this is going to be kind of things that help on the technical side. There's going to be technical elements, but at the end of the day, it's going to also be non-technical, so a little bit for everyone. Before we get started, the thoughts and opinions do not necessarily reflect those of IBM, which I completely forgot my intro slide. It's a shocker. But I'm a senior security architect at IBM. I have my own blog and podcast, Advanced Persistent Security. I speak quite a bit. I was at B-Sides earlier this year here. I write blogs for various outlets such as CSO, Dark Reading, Alien Vault, IBM. So let's go ahead and get into the talk. So why this talk? Well, I was taking the SANS Forensics 508 course, the Advanced Incident Response Forensics and Threat Hunting course, and there's the information about what it corresponds to. But I was like, these things are very efficient when we're doing them as part of a forensics investigation. Why are we not doing them proactively to make life easier? Because at the end of the day, as security people, in a way, we're lazy. In a way, we're not. In a way, we like to do things the hardest way possible. So it's a strange dichotomy that we live in, but it's the nature of the beast. So basically, this talk is the outcome of the thoughts associated with, I'll go academic for a moment, my reflection and consumption and synthesization of the material. So with that being said, let's go ahead and kind of set the stage so everyone's on the same page. What is DFIR, or DFIR? It is digital forensics in incident response. Digital forensics being the science of recreating, restructuring, and determining what happened. Incident response being the organization response, both technical and non-technical. So when HR gets involved, or finance gets involved and has to buy things, that's part of incident response. Commonly within industry, we use the misnomer of incident response when we should be saying incident handling. Incident handling being the technical aspects of responding to the incident. And that definition's coming from the SANS Internet Storm Center, so if you want to argue with someone, you can argue with Dr. Ulrich all day, I suppose. I don't think you'll win, but it's okay. I wouldn't try to argue with him. Joe, would you argue with him? Okay. He likes to live life dangerously. He'll be up next. But anyway, the incident response process, we commonly refer to this as PICURL. Preparation, identification, containment, eradication, recovery, lessons learned. If you are not actively in an incident situation, you are either in the lessons learned phase or the preparation phase. More than likely, if you're sitting in this audience, you're in a heightened sense of lessons learned phase because you're learning more about preparation and better ways to identify and respond. This talk kind of focuses on the cusp between preparation and identification, with some things for the rest of the process as well. So we always hear buzzwords, and sometimes buzzwords are legit, sometimes it's snake oil. I'll be honest about it. All you've got to do is walk into a vendor hall and you can see the snake oil. I'm not saying here. You could go to the giant con in the Bay Area, the vendor area there. There's all sorts of places for it. But anyway, we always hear things like cyber threat intelligence or just threat intelligence. So where does it fit into the equation? Anyone? Where does it fit in with incident response? Is it one and the same? Would threat intelligence be the same as incident response? No. Okay. Does threat intelligence trigger incident response, or does incident response produce threat intelligence? There's the main bullet. Which is it? Both, correct. So you may have a piece of threat intelligence that gives you a clue as to there's this adverse event in your organization that you should respond to based on what we've seen occur elsewhere. Alternatively, you may be in a cutting-edge position with a cutting-edge company, and you are the first to see and observe some sort of an attack, or it may be a new variation. Instead of WannaCry coming in via SMB on port 443, it decides it's going to come in via RDP. Okay, sure. Insert vulnerability here. They rewrite some code, it's completely new-ish. So there are new TTPs for how they're doing it. You could actually produce valuable threat intelligence. It gets tricky because some organization policies say, yes, you can release this to the public. Others say, no. I can't tell you what your organization says, but definitely check with them before you release something to the public. So with this, thinking about forensics, when I was going into the course, I didn't really think about what it consists of. When I thought digital forensics, I thought file system forensics. So things like FTK, SleuthKit, Scalpel. To some degree, now that I've taken the course and learned, to some degree, volatility could even help with some of this. Network forensics, I've been in industry for a little bit. I'd heard of Wireshark. I saw a lot of network administrators using it. I never really thought of it as a forensic tool. Network Miner, it's a lazy man's Wireshark. And when I say lazy, I mean I love it. Whenever I was a consultant and I was working with Pcaps, oftentimes the salespeople would scope a contract that should be for, say, 24 hours for a 6-hour gig. So having the time to sit and write those regular expressions to actually get things out of Wireshark was not necessarily feasible. Network Miner was a blessing. And the thing is, it's free. You can get a paid version, but you have full functionality for the most part at the ripe price of free $99. So that moves on to memory forensics. And that's really what I want to hammer through this presentation. Common tools with that would be volatility, recall, which actually is a fork of the original volatility that's now maintained by Google as part of Google Rapid Response, and redline. If you want to play with some operating systems, SANS has SIFT, the SANS Investigative Forensic Toolkit, and RMNUX. There's another one that is not through SANS called CANE, the Computer Aided Investigative Network Environment. To some degree, Kali also does this, but it's not really looking at doing things like analyzing malicious PDFs or creating a timeline. It's more interested in, okay, get a copy of this memory image, let's run volatility, let's run the Mimikatz module of volatility through it and get some passwords and move on. So it's just worth taking into account. So threat hunting. I said this wasn't about threat hunting, but I think that it's a good time to dispel the myth of threat hunting. So it's snake oil for the most part, sometimes. It has a valid reason, not even going to lie. But what is it really? It is doing the same thing you do as part of digital forensics before something happens. It's taking a memory image of a host, analyzing it, and looking for actors. You could have a specific piece of threat intelligence you're looking for, or you could just be doing a general scan to see if you can find anything out of the norm. That's all it really is. So the tools and the techniques of threat hunting, for the most part, are the same that you would use for forensic investigations. The benefits of this, you have a faster incident response time. The problem with that is you have to have a certain level of maturity. If you're not meeting the first 5 critical security controls, as well as critical security control number 19, the one for incident response, you have no business threat hunting. I say this because with threat hunting, it's not something that's readily outsourceable, because it's based upon what is normal. So what is normal? Can you find out what is normal in an enterprise in 9 hours when you're talking thousands of hosts? You can get some idea, but could you really say that it's comprehensive? Maybe not so much. You'll have ideas. And that's not to say you can't go get memory images, use tools, even get a file system image and poke around and find things. You could totally find things, but you're missing a lot of the power of doing so. So with that, the prerequisite would deal with size, maturity, capabilities. If you have your incident response team, they could be hunting while they're not actively responding. It's always worthwhile. Also with it, it's not based on a time constraint, within reason, of course. So your time constraint for a hunt engagement, if you were using your internal incident response team, would be between incidents until the next incident. So you're going to hunt, and then when you find something, there's a new incident. Or when an incident happens, there you go, the hunt is over. Resume later. Whereas with forensics, the technical forensics staff always says, we want to analyze, we want to let it detonate, we want to let it do what it needs to do so we can get all the intelligence out of it and find out what's going on, right? The business is like, yeah, that's a great idea. No, you need this back up and running because in this industry, 3 things are money, right? Processing power, time, storage. So while something is in a degraded state, that's costing the company money. If they've got someone from the outside in, they've pulled in a consulting firm to do this, that is also money. The good thing about threat hunting is to trigger it, it does not require the FBI or Brian Krebs to come knocking on your door and say, hey, by the way. So, because to quote Jason Street, Brian Krebs should not be your IDS, right? So here's part of the standard incident response and forensics talk. Logging, okay, yep, do it verbose. Parse when you can. Normalize it, integrate it with your SIM. It's going to make you or break you. But at the same time, you need to have those logs sent somewhere else. You don't want the ransomware that takes down your system to also encrypt your logs to where you cannot find out what's going on with them later. Inventory everything. Critical security controls number 1 and 2 have an inventory of authorized and unauthorized hardware and software. Okay. So what happens when the CEO brings in this IoT device and your CIO or CISO says, okay, but you never find out? What happens when it's too close to the street, too low in the building, someone from the street exploits it and then works their way through your network? What happens? You didn't know it was there, so there's nothing you could have done about it. So you have to find ways to inventory. So scanning all of your internal IP ranges in the non-routable IP ranges, that's definitely a good idea. Have a network time. It doesn't have to be NTP specifically. It doesn't have to synchronize to NIST or Microsoft or whomever. But you need to have it normalized across your environment. If you have sites here and a site in, say, Alaska, you need to define a time that the logs are going to be logging in so you're not trying to do math on your fingers while you're looking at log data between the 2 sites. Just have something. And then baselines. I know a lot of people in the audience are affiliated in some way, shape, or form with the government. And I know that from my days working in the DoD, a baseline consisted of a MAC address, an IP address, a host name, operating system. And if we were lucky, when I was an auditor, we might have a software list that may have the version, maybe. There's a little bit more that you're going to need. I'll tell you a little bit about that in a bit. But with regards to incident response, and this is kind of where we do go wrong, we need to know who to notify, how to notify. If a user clicks to phish, who are they supposed to notify? How does that person want to be notified? I'll give you a hint. If you're dealing with something that's attack-related, email may not be a good idea because you should probably just take the zero trust model and assume that it is compromised as well. So you need to look at things like Slack, chat, text, phone calls, encrypted messaging apps, face-to-face, Campbell's soup cans on a rope, carrier pigeons, smoke signals, Morse code, whatever you want. It's up to you. What action do you want them to take? Depending on your forensics posture and what you want to do within your organization, what do you want them to do? I can't tell you the right answer because I don't know your policy. Your policy might be to hibernate the system. It may be to reboot the system. It may be to shut the system down, disconnect from the wall, the network. Do nothing, lock the screen, log out. What? There's no right or wrong. I always think of this from the perspective of my mom. She's nearing 60. She's more technical than some, less technical than most of the people in this room. But if I were to tell her to unplug the network cable in the back of a desktop, by the time I actually got to look at the desktop, every single cable would be unplugged. That's a problem. So those of us in this room that have worked in the government environment, show of hands, who can remember the bomb threat worksheet next to every single phone? All right, why do we not have an incident response worksheet next to the computer with this information? Notify this person at this number, at this email, at this whatever. Clank your soup cans 4 times to get their attention. Whatever. What do we want them to report? What they were doing, what it did, what they had done prior to, what actions they took. Back to that whole unplugging the cable thing. Use the same color network cable so you can put on that form, if your action is to unplug from the network, unplug the yellow cable. Because if I told my mom to unplug the yellow cable, that would be the only thing that's unplugged. So why are we not doing this? At the same time, we have to respect the chain of custody, especially if it's something that's going to go to litigation. Because a lot of things that we say in industry, you can say to a lawyer and see their eyes glaze over. Chain of custody is not one of them. Respect it, because if you have to go to court, it's going to make your life really easy or really hard. Without regard to guilt or innocence with O.J. Simpson, think of that case and the fact that the chain of custody was not respected. Had it been respected, the outcome of that trial may have been different. And that's just pure speculation. But a couple of things that you don't want to do. An account gets compromised. Don't change the password. Non-repudiation just walked out the door when you did it. If you're in an organization that's going to have to outsource your incident response, when you get hit with that fileless ransomware, because you had an RDP server on the public internet without a VPN in the middle, with a 4-character password corresponding to admin, and someone logged in and they pivoted and encrypted, and you're about to spend $32,000 in Bitcoin, don't delete the VM if you actually want to find out what happened. I only say that because it may have happened. Maybe. Anyway, so let's talk about the cool stuff now that we've got past the traditional incident response stuff. So memory forensics. In many situations, it really does feel like voodoo. I'm not even going to lie. But basically, you can get your memory captures using various tools. You can go from free to very expensive. For example, Google Rapid Response. It has the capability. You can actually analyze it on the platform because recall is built in. F-Response, that's a paid solution. Mandiant Intelligent Response. If you're like me and like to do things on a shoestring budget, for the ripe price of free $50, you can get FTK Imager Lite. Put it on a thumb drive, as long as the thumb drive has more capacity than the RAM of the host. So a 64 gig thumb drive, your host has 12 gigs of RAM, you're golden. You can actually have that executable on the thumb drive, acquire it to the thumb drive, and walk away. It doesn't have to be expensive. With assessment tools, I've already mentioned volatility, I've already mentioned recall. Redline is another good one. It's a Mandiant FireEye tool. If you're going to do it, you want to do it prior to version 1.20. There's this thing called the Malware Risk Index that went away. I use version 1.14. It loads slower than 1.20, but whenever you put the memory image in it and it's assessing the processes and what have you, depending on certain levels of heuristics, if it meets certain criteria, there's this little disk next to it that will turn red. You're not looking to find out exactly what happened in Redline. That's your 30,000-foot view. You're looking for clues on where to look otherwise. You're going to take that information, you're going to take a few notes. Okay, what's the PID, what's the parent PID, process ID, what IP addresses was this communicating with, what is this associated with? You're going to take those notes, and then you're going to open up volatility or recall and then dig in that way. Those are the two tools that you're trying to dig to the center of the earth with, not Redline. Oh, wrong button. So with this, what can we do when analyzing a memory image? You can see what's on the system, what may have not made it to logs yet. If you're doing malware analysis, a good friend of mine, he does it a lot, and he's a huge fan of sysinternals. I was like, so you do this in a virtual machine? He was like, yeah. Okay, why don't you detonate it, pause the VM, take the vmem file, the virtual memory file, and import it into, say, volatility and analyze it? Well, because I need to use sysinternals, but it has the same stuff. He's not looked back since. Because you have that capability with procmon, procdump, and so on. Cross-reference other analysis, like your timelines, like your log analysis, like what the FBI or Brian Krebs is telling you. You can even find out things about the Windows registry. If you know a specific key, you can find the exact date and time that key was created. And per the instructor, Rob Lee of the course, basically he said something to the effect that most adversaries cannot modify that registry key creation date after it is written. He didn't say that it's impossible, but more than likely, if an adversary can change that date, you're not going to know they're in your network anyway. So I wouldn't sweat too much on that one. Find malware. You can always find out what's going on with some processes. What kind of things are they doing? Can you check some statistical checks? Okay. Oh, wrong button again. So with volatility, you can dump passwords. I mentioned Mimikatz whenever I was talking about Kali. There's a Mimikatz module there. There's a hash dump module as well. So you can dump and pass the hash. You can look at those rogue processes. You can look at the registry key creation date. You can actually carve out executables from processes. And then guess what? Move to like virus total, upload the hash, upload the snippet. It will actually tell you, yes, this is malicious. No, it is not. The get key, that's the whole registry key piece. And then, of course, the timeline. With that timeliner, you can actually write that to the same timeline that your file system is going to create and look at them on top of each other. Prefetch, that's another fun one. There's a plugin called Prefetch Parser. Basically, it's something that deals with Windows application compatibility. Prefetch will run as well as something called Superfetch. And basically what it's going to do is it's going to help applications start faster. Lack of a prefetch means two things. Either A, it's not configured, or B, if it is configured, it's been deleted, and you're going to want to look for that too. It's going to tell you what really ran. Another tool or file system feature, rather, that will help you out with that is also called the Shim Cache. Formerly, it is known as the Application Compatibility Cache. It's going to give you a lot of the same information, but it's also going to give you things like standard information, such as the last modified time. You'll get the full path, the full size, and it's based upon this area of the registry. So it's something definitely to look at. Within SIFT, there's actually a Python script that can parse this as well, independently of volatility. So back to the baselines. Why are we not taking hashes of processes, of DLLs, of executables, especially SVC host? SVC host running is probably the most legitimate process name I've ever seen. Just for grins, one time I wrote a Python script that said hello world. The file name was svchost.py. Probably would have went unnoticed by many sources because it was SVC host. I never tried to play with it, but it's just gone to prove that it's something that's there. So we know what's there. We know the version numbers. How do we know if the files have changed? And this is bringing file integrity monitoring into the equation. There's two types of hashes we should be taking. MD5, or if you don't like MD5, you can go with SHA-1, SHA, whatever you would like. It doesn't matter because you're not trying to keep this from being cracked. You're doing it for integrity, right? So go ahead, use MD5, use SHA-1, 256, whatever you like. Okay, you have that. Now, every time the system is updated, or you could even do this as a redundancy check whenever it boots, whatever you'd like. Check to see, does this hash match? If yes, great. If no, okay, it's changed, but what changed? Preemptively, you should have also ran what is called fuzzy hashing. You're going to use a tool called ssdeep to do this. It's going to do a byte-by-byte hash. So within the logic tree of this file integrity check that I've mentioned, if it matches the MD5, it closes. If it doesn't match, then have it compare against the ssdeep. It's going to give you an idea of where to look. It's basically a diff. Look at the file diff, see what changed. Then you can validate, is this legitimate or is this something that's coming from a malicious actor? With your registry, You should always have a backup of your registry. Check your registry. Do what you've got to do to protect it. You can script all of these things. You can use regular expressions to actually supercharge this. When you're creating baselines, you should have a standard image. So within your organization, have a standard image for the entire organization. And when I say image, I'm not meaning memory image at this point. I'm meaning an ISO file. So this is our standard Windows image for company XYZ. Okay? Execute it. Do a memory capture. You now have a basis to compare using these 3 baseline modules that I've referenced at the top of the slide in volatility to see what has changed. Every time you update this standard image, do a new memory capture. That way you have something that flags in your SIM, or you know there's some sort of malicious activity. You need something to compare it to. You're not scrambling at the last moment to find a known good host. You've already got one. Also with the images, HR has certain software they need. IT has certain software they need. Operations has the software they need. Have an image for each of those. There's no reason to take a memory capture of every single host, because again, the 3 things that are the most expensive: storage, processing power, time. I don't care who you are, you will run out of storage room, or you will run out of budget to maintain more storage space. So you have to have a way to do this. You can script it. It's up to you. If you're a small shop, 10 hosts, not a whole lot of RAM, it would be easy to do. But nevertheless, it's something worthwhile. It's something worth thinking about. And with the baselines, to compare the processes, that's why you want to have that standard image for each element of your organization. You want to say, well, HR uses ADP. They have this ADP software on the host. Okay, its process name is this. You need to have that captured so you can compare it at a later time. With drivers, same thing. Anything within System 32, you need to be watching specifically. And that goes back to the piece about hashing. A friend of mine and I are actually working on a script that's just going to go through. It's not going to be anything complicated or high-end. It's probably just going to be a PowerShell script that's going to go in and determine what you have in System 32 and take 2 hashes of it, write it to 2 different files. And then we'll write another script or another module to this script that will compare and then alert one way or another, whatever we want it to do. It's something that's coming. So something else that comes into this that just kind of is to supercharge. Take Pcaps as often as possible. Again, storage is money. But whenever you can do it, take it and store it for as long as possible. It may help with determining what is normal. It may give you something to analyze. Storage again. Integrate with your SIM. Have things like NetFlow. It's the metadata, right? It's just like what Snowden said about the NSA. Oh, people were like, they're recording our calls. They're recording metadata, so they knew who you're talking to, when you're talking to them, and for how long you're talking. And at this point, I'm only using that as an example. I'm actually talking about NetFlow when I say this. You know which hosts are communicating, at what times, for how long, and the file size of what is transferred. That gives you an idea of what is considered normal. If you have a spike every Tuesday at 5 p.m., okay, cool, it's every Tuesday. That is normal. Something is causing that. Well, come to find out, your company gets paid on Thursdays. It's HR running payroll. Got it. Perfect. Syncing with ADP, right? Logs, of course. Pcaps, a lot of SIMs will actually do that. If it sees an adverse event, it will actually start a Pcap for you. You might not get the very beginning of it, but you'll get part of it. Something to work with. Vulnerability data. I'm not going to go into vulnerability management, but we all know the importance of vulnerability management within a reasonable time frame. If we need any reference of that, let's look back about 12 and a half to 13 months ago when the world was turned upside down for a day or two because of WannaCry. If people would have just patched it, it wouldn't have been a problem. With the Pcaps, you can carve them. That's another fun thing with Network Miner. In the hour version of this presentation, I actually have a Network Miner demo where I pull a packet capture up. I show you 2 hosts that's been communicating. we look at some of the parameters that were passed, and then we're actually able to carve a file, which in this case, it was a file transfer of putty. And then we're able to look at it, get the hash, view the file, or execute the file as we see fit. And that's all through Network Miner. You can do similar things with Wireshark, but it's there. So as a byproduct, those of you who know Adrian Sanabria, he can see clearly now the rain is gone because he's got some memory images to work off of. So beyond that, I want to make you aware of a few things. I've got a mentorship program that I'm the co-organizer of in conjunction with Peerlist. It's called Through the Hacking Glass. Basically, we understand academia does one thing, certifications do another. We're trying to meet in the middle of those and basically say, you need experience, we're going to help you get experience. We're working with vendors to actually get not-for-resale licenses so people can get experience on things that they will see in a commercial enterprise environment. We can't help people get 8 years of Ethereum experience when it's only been around for 4, but we can certainly help you get a couple years of Cisco experience to help you get that first job. We're actively seeking mentors and mentees. Right now, we've got about 15 people signed up to be mentors, and we've got about 160 people signed up to be mentees. So it looks like we're going to have to run this as a cohort type thing. If you want more information, the contact information is on the slide. Upcoming speaking engagements, not this weekend, but next, Social Engineer Rhode Island. Then I'm competing in the DEF CON Social Engineering Capture the Flag, Hacker Halted, and Cybersecurity Atlanta. On the topic of Hacker Halted, if you want free admission, here's a coupon code. It's September 13th and 14th in Atlanta. Ticket prices are normally $200. There's the coupon code to get in for free. You can also get into training for 25% off. I always wait for this. I always give a little extra time for this slide because I see all the phones coming up. It kind of feels like the paparazzi for a moment. But it's all good. So with that being said, any questions? All right, I'm just slightly ahead of time, not too much. So if there are no questions, thank you very much.